Hello everyone and welcome to Macrophotography 101. In this series we're going to go over the equipment and skills you need to become an effective macro photographer, as well as discuss tips to save you money and improve your technique. The videos in this series will include equipment, focusing and depth of field, lighting and composition, indoor versus outdoor macro photography, and of course, advanced techniques to improve your skills. Some of the questions I'm hoping to answer for you today are: how big does your tripod need to be? Is there a significant difference between full frame cameras and crop cameras for macro? If you have two macro lenses that are different focal lengths, what's the difference in the image? Can I use constant lighting, or do I need to use my strobes? And how can I make my image larger than 1:1? Assuming you don't have a macro photography lens already, the easiest way to reach 1:1 is going to be with an extension tube. These are hollow tubes that extend your lens forward and allows you to enlarge the image. Now, in my opinion, the best lens to use them on is a 50mm 1.8, which is conveniently also one of the cheapest lenses available, so you should have one of those already. If not, it shouldn't be expensive for you to add one. And these extension tubes only cost around $40 or $50 for a set. Now, I've found that with the 50mm, you want to get as close to about a 50mm extension as possible. That'll get you to about 1:1. So it looks like this when it's assembled. And you're going to attach that to your camera, and that'll allow you to enlarge the image to a point where you'll achieve macro-like photos. There are a few downsides. The primary downside being that once you've attached these extension tubes, you can no longer reach infinity focus. You're going to find that you have a very small window to focus in, usually only about 3 or 4 inches. You can always remove the extension tubes, just like that. They just attach as if it was a lens attaching to a camera. The tubes I'm using are made by a company called Mieke, I believe is how you say it. I'll put the link to them. But these allow full AFS lens control on Nikons, as well as full aperture control. I do have one that's a little finicky. So these aren't a perfect solution by any means, but they do work, and they will get you to 1:1 quickly. So you may be wondering, how well does this work? Well, this is a file with the 50mm 1.8. So as you can see, my depth of field is extremely shallow. This is the entirety of my focus range. So there is absolutely no chance that I'm going to photograph something from more than a couple of inches away. So clearly, using this system does have some limitations. That said, it's worth trying, especially if you don't have a macro lens, so you can get an idea of whether or not macro is something that you want to do. Considering that you probably already have the 50mm in hand, you're looking at $30 or $40 to be able to try macro photography. Now, working distance is your most important choice when choosing a macro lens. As you can see, the 50mm on the 2 extension tubes is only about 2 inches away from our subject matter when focused down to 1:1, whereas the 60mm focused down to 1:1 is about 3 inches away, and the 105 focused down to 1:1 is about 7 inches away. That gives you significantly more working room to be able to light your subject. So being able to move that light closer and at harder angles will make significant differences in the way you're able to compose your images. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a series of photographs of our subject matter, which is one of these matchboxes, shot at as close to 1:1 as I can get on each of the 3 lenses. Now, the 50mm on the 2 extension tubes is going to provide me a slightly different exposure than the other 2 lenses because of the way that the distance affects aperture. With this system, it's not going to know the difference, so it's going to assume it's correct. So I'm going to do everything I can to try to keep the exposure as close as possible between the 3, but this way you'll be able to see the difference in image quality. So we're shooting at a 3/20th of a second at f5 at ISO 400, and we're going to take our first frame. Now I'm going to shoot these with self-timer, so that way there'll be no additional shake in the images. So there's our first frame with the 50 millimeter. So let's take off the 50. We'll set that there, and we will grab the 60. Now the 60 will not have to be moved very far. It can be left pretty close to where it is right now. And we will capture our next frame. It looks like we're going to need to stop down our aperture to about f8. So that shows you that the aperture that the extension tubes in the 50 millimeter thought it was at versus what it actually was at was significant. It was a gap of f5 to f8. So we've captured our next frame, and we're going to remove the 60 millimeter and switch to the 105. Now the 105 is going to have significantly more working room, so we're going to need to move this back quite a bit. Okay. So we're going to take our last frame here, and you'll notice that there's no difference between the aperture needed for the 105 and the 60 millimeter because the lenses correctly communicate with the camera and let it know what the correct aperture is. All right, guys, we just had some unexpected sushi show up, so I'm going to eat that, and I'll get back to this in a minute.
Probably save some for Joe to try.
No, it's ridiculous. Oh man, that was good. Let me tell you, there's one thing you're never going to get me to turn down, it's sushi. So if I'm ever doing anything and somebody offers me sushi, I'm probably going to stop. Anyway, so back to macro lenses. So hopefully you were able to see the value in having the additional working space when you're shooting subjects, especially moving subjects. It's really important if you're shooting bugs or if you're shooting like anything small that's alive, because it's gonna want to escape. So what's gonna happen is as you get closer to your subject, so as you get down on your subject, if it's something that's skittish, it's gonna run away. Whereas with the 105, because you have that extra working room, you're less likely to scare something off. So it's easier to light your subject. It's easier to get close to your subject. Now there are trade-offs. There are benefits to using shorter focal lengths. For example, if you want to get larger to 1:1, it's easier to do that with a 60 millimeter than it is with a 105. And I'll show you how later on. But for most people, I'm going to recommend you to start with 105 millimeter. I think the 105 millimeter is the best choice for general macro photography. It's also the best choice as a general purpose lens, in my opinion. It's going to work well for portraits. It's going to work well for almost anything that you would want to use a lens for. The 105 is going to be a good choice, and that holds true for Nikon and Canon and Sony, any other company. They all offer 60-ish and 105-ish focal length macro lenses. I would very much recommend you to get the 105. There is one situation that I would recommend you to use the 60 millimeter in, though, and that's if you're shooting downward. And the reason why is because that extra working space that you have with the 105 is going to push you up sometimes above a comfortable standing position, and you'll find that it's extremely difficult. This isn't shooting at 1:1. This is shooting at close ranges, but again, these are going to be close-up images, not full macro images. But if you expect to do a lot of shooting down on subjects, I would get the 60. There is justifiable reason to have both. However, I feel like it's easy to create a level of duplicity that you don't need. So I would get the 105 if you don't have a really good portrait lens already. Now to follow that up, we need to talk about sensor size. Most of you are probably going to have a crop sensor camera. There are tons and tons and tons of crop sensor cameras out in circulation. They're fantastic. They work perfectly fine. There's no reason not to use them for macro photography, and in a lot of ways they actually may be superior for your usage. There are some very specific reasons why you would pick a full frame camera for macro use over a crop camera. But for the average user, a full frame camera is probably not the right choice. So this is the 105 on the Nikon D5600, a crop sensor camera. And we're going to switch to the D750. And do this same exposure and same frame. So now here we are on the full frame camera in the same position as we were with the DX camera. And then we're going to move the camera forward to get the same perspective. So as you can see, we had to get quite a bit closer in order to get that same perspective on full frame. However, we were able to achieve the same perspective. So it doesn't make it any more difficult to get the type of images that we're looking for. It just means that we have slightly less working room, and we also will have slightly shallower depth of field. I really would push you to do everything you can to extend your depth of field as much as possible, and that's going to include using a crop sensor camera if you have one available. But let's take a look and see what the difference in using the 60mm lens on the crop sensor camera is versus using the 105 on the full frame sensor camera. The effective focal length between these two combinations is only 15mm apart, because the 60mm will act like a 90mm on the crop camera, whereas the 105 will truly act as a 105mm lens on the full frame camera. So here we can see the difference in working distance between the 105 on the full frame camera and the 60 on the crop camera. So even with the benefit of the crop sensor camera, the 60mm is still closer. However, this is much, much more working room, and you'd be able to light these both equally well. So now neither of these lenses are at 1:1. The 105 is around 1.5 to 1, and the 60 is around 2 to 1. So neither of them are at their maximum magnification, but rather I have them with the matchbook filling the frame, so they are both replicating the same image size. So my recommendation for most people starting out in macro photography, just trying to decide between a lens and a camera body, I would recommend that you start with the 105mm lens and a high resolution crop sensor. Now, one thing that we have not yet discussed are tripods. So let's talk about those now. So the first question you're going to ask yourself when you're looking to purchase a tripod is, how big of a tripod do I need? Now, if you're going to be doing a lot of hiking, if you're going to be going backpacking, if you're going to be carrying this equipment long distances on your back, then I would highly recommend something small, light, nimble, made out of carbon fiber. Something like this is a Gitzo 1 Series Traveler. It's got 5 leg sections, which means it compresses very small, but it's still a reasonable height. It's got a center column, so I'm able to make small adjustments easily. This is a very, very good tripod for carrying long distances. It weighs about 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds. So this would be a great option if you're hiking. However, if you're going to be working out of your car, or if you're going to be carrying most of your equipment, short distances, if you're working from your house, I would highly recommend you go for something heavier and more stable. This is a Gitzo Series 4 tripod. Also 5 leg sections, so it still collapses fairly small. This would be a great choice if you're going to be driving your equipment somewhere and you're going to be working within a few feet of the car. It's much heavier, but it's much more stable. So this is what I would recommend if you were going to be doing mostly short trips. Now, something more important than weight, though, when it comes to macro photography is features. Most tripods will either have no center column like this, or they'll have a center column like this one, which allows it to go up and down and make small incremental adjustments. However, some tripods have a special trick. This is a Manfrotto 190X Pro B. It's an aluminum tripod. It's got flip leg locks. It's a fairly short tripod, and it's fairly lightweight, but it has a special ability where when we raise the center column, as we get to the top, we can actually release a safety catch and rotate the tripod around. And what that allows us to do is get the tripod to boom out over top of things and get into positions that a regular tripod simply couldn't do. So this tripod would allow you to extend it over a brook. It would allow you to extend it over a stream, over a table, which is incredibly helpful for doing product photography, which something macro photographers do a lot of. So that would be a huge benefit. Other tripods, such as this Manfrotto, this is a Manfrotto 055, And this does the same thing. However, in order to remove it, you have to unscrew the center column and see, you can see it separating here. And then I'm able to remove the center column, reposition it, and tighten it back down. The downside with this system is it's cumbersome. It takes a lot of time and it's kind of irritating. That tripod's much more versatile because it's a simple button push, but this also allows me to boom it out. And so that's hugely beneficial. Now this is a carbon fiber tripod. However, I've personally found in my experience that Gitzo produces a better tripod. So Gitzo and Manfrotto are owned by the same company, but Manfrotto is more of their budget line. The tripods are good, but for me, I've noticed a lot of vibrations. So if you tap a leg, or if there's something, if you're near something that's moving, if a car drives past, you'll introduce small vibrations that take longer to level out than the Gitzos. This Gitzo 1 series I found to be as stable is this Manfrotto 055. Even though the Manfrotto is much, much larger, the Gitzo is more stable, and it's so stable it fell over. But the Gitzo is much more stable. So I would highly recommend the Gitzo brand if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, it's fine. Buy what you can afford right now, but you'll eventually move up to something more stable. As far as heads, it's important that you understand that good tripods seldom will come with a ball head already attached. This head is a Really Right Stuff BH55. It's a huge, extremely heavy head. This head weighs about 2¼ pounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it weighs nearly what this whole tripod does. So considering that, I wouldn't want to take it long distances, but it's incredibly smooth and it's incredibly strong and stable. You can put a boom arm on here, which I do quite often with this, where I'll put an extension that allows me to mount the camera further out. And it's very, very stable. It locks down solid, it doesn't move. This is by far my favorite choice for a tripod head and tripod legs if I don't have to carry my tripod any distance. Now, the reason why you would pick carbon fiber versus aluminum has a little bit to do with the weight, although the weight isn't a huge difference. It's got more to do with how the tripod handles vibrations. Carbon fiber dampens vibrations much better. So carbon fiber not only is lighter, but it's more stable. And as an added benefit, it doesn't transfer temperature. So if it's really, really hot, your aluminum tripod may get extremely hot too. If it's really, really cold, your aluminum tripod will also get equally cold. Whereas carbon fiber insulates itself from that. So it's a much better material from a comfort perspective too. There's not so much difference that if you can't afford a carbon fiber tripod that you shouldn't buy an aluminum one. Definitely buy what you can afford. But the carbon fiber will be a better choice if you can swing the cost. So we've determined that the 105mm lens on a crop sensor camera is probably your best bet for getting started in macro photography. We've also discussed support systems and determined that the carbon fiber is the best choice. However, given budgetary constraints, a aluminum tripod would also be fine. There was not a significant difference in perspective between the 105 and the 60mm when you are in macro range. However, I do feel that the extension tubes on a 50mm lens, while they work in a pinch, are not a long-term viable solution. It's something that you will start using and you will quickly migrate away from. From a budget perspective, you can produce some absolutely stunning images using a crop sensor camera and a cheap 60 or 105mm lens. Most manufacturers have previous versions of their lenses that you can shop that'll save you some money. There are some minor negatives, but most of the time they're not significant enough to warrant paying the upcharge if you don't have to. We've pretty much covered all of the equipment that you're going to need to get into macro photography. I'm looking very much forward to our second video where we're going to go over focusing and depth of field, and then we're going to start working on lighting your subject. Well, thank you for sticking with me. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.